Remember, in those days we had censorship in books, and Kerouac's early books, Burroughs' books were censored, even my work. We all have a private life, and we all know what goes on in our own lives, but what we see in the papers is not like our real lives, and the media is not like our real lives, with all the warts and all the loves, the feeling of sacred world, the peaceableness, meditation, or eros, or, for my case, homosexuality.
Unspeakable Visions, Beat Works, and ongoing censorship in the U.S. schools. So I'm intending to bring some of these political battles up to contemporary times. You're a parent in a small town in the Northeast United States. One afternoon, your child comes home from high school and tells you that her English teacher read a poem in class about sex between two men. She quotes some lines of the poem by Allen Ginsberg. "Please, master, may I kneel at your feet? Please, master, can I loosen your blue pants? Please, master, order me down on the floor. Please, master, tell me to lick your thick shaft." And these are not the most graphic phrases in the poem. As a parent, how do you react? Do you support the teacher reading this poem in the classroom because you value free speech and poetry that challenges its audience? Are you disturbed that the teacher read a sexually graphic poem without alerting parents and students in advance? Are you furious that the school you fund with your tax dollars allows this kind of poetry in a classroom? These responses were among the ones shared by various parents in the community. U.S. high school classrooms are battlefields where liberals and conservatives fight for the predominance of their respective ideologies regarding literature in its presentation of race, class, and gender. Typically, the left supports greater inclusion in the curriculum, including the strong language and contentious subject matter typical of the beat writers, while the right typically wants greater limitations on language and subject matter. The U.S. Constitution has a role in situating these contending positions, but there is no national set of guidelines for high school teachers. Laws and policies regarding freedom of and limitations on speech in the classroom vary from place to place and even from school to school. In 1791, the United States ratified the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. The idea is that in a free republic, citizens should voice their opinions without fear of government sanction. Many forms of expression are protected. However, obscenity is not and has never been protected speech. Yet the government has never provided a clear definition of what obscenity is. As Supreme Court Justice Stuart Potter said in 1964, "I know it when I see it." On the other hand, we have determined what obscenity is not. In today's law, a work, whether written or visual, is not obscene if it possesses serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. But that doesn't mean you can teach it in high school. Let's start with a fundamental aspect of communication, differentiating private thoughts from public thoughts. Your private thoughts are your own business. But if you speak these thoughts in a public forum, such as in a classroom, your thoughts become available for public scrutiny. We can say the same about the production of text. If you're typing at your kitchen table late at night, or scribbling in a notebook, whatever you write is your own business. If you publish, though, your interior thoughts are available for public scrutiny, that is, publication, in an external arena where the government holds power. Private thoughts that might be acceptable in a letter to your lover might be considered obscene if published. Publication is, in one sense, the deliberate creation of a persistent record of one's thoughts. So there's a clear demarcation between the words that are acceptable in a private form but might be obscene in a public one. U.S. schools are public forums, and the government has the ability both to protect and to limit speech in the classroom. This includes the material that teachers assign to students and the material that is on the shelves of the libraries. The beat writers present an intersection of tensions in that balance between the public and private spheres. Generally, the beat writers turned out their private thoughts for public consumption. Whether or not those thoughts include obscenity hinges on whether the works in question possess serious literary or artistic value. We can rely on documentary evidence to trace the ways that U.S. society historically has censored books in publication, marketing, mailing, and sales. But there is a more subtle and possibly undetectable level of social pressure on writers themselves at the moment of composition that is a kind of censorship as well. The chilling effect of government censorship and of social censure may prevent writers from expressing their most honest feelings and thoughts. That is to say, if publication is the goal, writers may enact self-censorship, even unconsciously, before putting their most honest feelings and thoughts on paper. Confessional, revelatory writing is the core of beat literature. Because what happens when writers are afraid to write, when they fear that their fears are unfit subject matter? That's the challenge beats faced, and their achievement came at a cost. In his Paris Review interview, Jack Kerouac said, "Notoriety and the public confession is a frazzler of the heart you were born with." One impetus in the generation of beat writing was the desire of the writers to close the gap between private and public. Kerouac, for one, denounced the craft of fiction making, instead cherishing spontaneous prose, which he described as writing in an uninhibited state that produces what conscious art would censor. Allen Ginsberg often drew material for his poems directly from his private journals in an attempt to thwart the natural impulse for self-censorship. In these ways, they were in sync with the 1950s trend for psychoanalysis that plumbed interior thoughts and submerged feelings. Freudian psychoanalysis, with its emphasis on the recollection of events from early childhood and the uncovering of unconscious desires, not to mention the centrality of sexuality as a driving factor in human emotions and behavior, reached a peak of influence among therapists in the US in the 1950s. Even before this wave, the Beat Circle had been engaged in psychoanalysis, particularly William Burroughs, who introduced Freud's theories to Kerouac and Ginsberg. The act of discovering and then revealing one's submerged feelings and memories, and the courage required to publish them, may be among the most appealing reasons that students respond in powerful and personal ways to the beats. A high school student in the late 1950s said of Allen Ginsberg's How, "I felt he was speaking for all of us." But this can also be a problem when uninhibited, soul-deep communication gets banned from the shelves of the school library. Ginsberg recounted that when he began typing the lines that became How, he wrote a phrase that he assumed rendered his writing unpublishable: "Fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists." This realization freed him from social constraints, and thus he felt free to write what he wished, knowing that his family, for example, would never read the words that he put together. Of course, Ginsberg's celebrated public reading of How in October 1955, Lawrence Ferlinghetti asked for the manuscript so he could publish it in the City Lights Pocket Poets series. Ginsberg claimed that in publishing How, he intended to disseminate a poem so strong that a clean Saxon four-letter word might enter high school anthologies permanently and deflate tendencies toward authoritarian strong-arming. It's very interesting then to consider this: Ginsberg's self-censoring of his early readings of the poem, saying the word blank, instead of the word fucked, for example, as well as the poem's original censored publication with asterisks replacing fucked in the asterisk, clearly indicate the influence of that authoritarian strong-arm in the 1950s. Has that authoritarianism persisted in today's high school classroom? Let's go back to the high school class I mentioned in the introduction. In Connecticut in 2015, a student brought Ginsberg's Please Master to his advanced placement English teacher, a veteran of 16 years who had won statewide teaching awards. The students in the class were all 17 and 18-year-olds who in a few months would be in college. The teacher read to the class the poem that dramatizes complete physical and spiritual supplication to one's lover. The poem relies on words that many people have long considered obscene to describe actions that many consider pornographic. As a result, the school administration suspended the teacher and then fired him. Essentially, he was fired for reading a poem by Ginsberg. The school superintendent's letter to the teacher includes this: "You did not discuss with any other teacher or administrator your extraordinary decision to present this poem in class. You did not warn students about the content of the poem, nor give them an opportunity to opt out." The superintendent concluded the teacher showed egregiously poor professional judgment. In an online discussion board on the topic, one participant said, "If I were teaching this class, I wouldn't have read it because I realized the trouble it would cause. However, I think we need to seriously reevaluate these high school courses if these kinds of restrictions remain." In other words, this person does not agree to the restrictions, but would not have read the poem out of fear of reprisal. Other participants in the forum noted that 17 and 18-year-olds should be able to discuss sex in the classroom, even or especially sexual experience that makes them uncomfortable. Carrie Nelson, an American professor, poetry professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, defended the teacher's choice of material. Certainly students on their way to college in an advanced college prep class need to know that sometimes things can be uncomfortable. That's what education is about. Nelson then posed a question that links contemporary and canonical American poetry. That should have happened when I said fuck in the accent. "If you can't handle Ginsberg," Nelson said, "how are you going to teach Walt Whitman?" Today in Kansas, public school teachers can be sentenced to 6 months in jail for teaching material that any reasonable person believes has no serious literary, scientific, educational, or artistic value if that material contains description, exhibition, or presentation of nudity, sexual conduct, or sexual excitement. Spokesperson for Kansas National Education Association, Marcus Baltzel, believes the real agenda behind this new state law has very little to do with protecting students' morals. He believes that the state's governor was pushing divisive social issues in order to distract the media and the public from the state's fiscal crisis and the budget cuts that have hurt public education. Educators have been on the front line fighting the governor's agenda, Baltzel says. The goal of his law is to discredit teachers. Ultimately, it's about political payback. What are some effects of the limitations on high school teachers? After the teacher in Connecticut was fired for reading Ginsberg's Please Master, would other teachers be wise to avoid that poem? And further, shouldn't they avoid other poems by Ginsberg, such as How, one of the most socially important poems of the 20th century? Are high school teachers in Kansas now less likely to assign a work by Allen Ginsberg, or Lenore Kendall, or Michael McClure, or William S. Burroughs? If so, we consider this a further result of the chilling effect of the threat of legal action on teachers who assign beat work in high school. More than 60 years after the San Francisco trial over Howe's legal status, the poem still presents risks for high school teachers, and the same can be said for other beat works as well. Bruce McNamee, writing for collegeboard.org, says, as teachers of literature, we handle intellectual and spiritual dynamite every day. I suggest teachers should bring their students to an understanding of the complexity of the issues involving what they teach. High school students usually participate enthusiastically in discussions of censorship and freedom of speech. It's important then to teach these works as literature, and equally important to teach students about the censorship challenges faced by these works. Unfortunately, few teachers have a comprehensive background in censorship policy. That's because judicial policies regarding censorship do not reside in any one place. They are spread among the policies of private and public schools, as well as in local, state, and federal statutes that inform and contest against one another. In addition, these statutes are constantly shifting and adapting to the atmosphere of new content in new media. As a result, a particular book or video or song or comic may be banned in one school library and openly displayed in another. According to the National Council of Teachers of English, censorship in high schools is a widespread problem. The NCTE encourages teachers, librarians, and school administrators to consider the merits of any complaint, but on the other hand, to defend their literature programs with intelligence and vigor. The Council recommends that teachers work actively to protect the students' right to read by establishing a representative committee to consider book selection procedures and carrying out a vigorous campaign to develop a community atmosphere in which local citizens may be enlisted to support the freedom to read. The NCTE points out that English teachers are better qualified to choose and recommend books for their classes than persons who are not prepared in the field. Yet, this expertise may pit them against school administrators who have legal responsibilities and against some parents who will fight to protect their children from what they see as a liberal agenda or from plain old immorality. Matthew Monahan, writing for the Yale New Haven Teachers Institute, says, I would advise against using Ginsberg's quintessential beat poem, How, in its entirety in high school, unless one has extensive knowledge of his or her students. This is not to say I advocate censorship. However, Ginsberg's depiction of the best minds of his generation who let themselves be sodomized is arguably worthy of an NC-17 rating. That refers to the American Motion Picture Board putting ratings on movies. A person must be 17 years or older in order to gain admittance. Monahan goes on to point out that some administrators complain that the teaching of beat literature may cause some students to adopt the beat attitude and use it as an excuse for not completing assignments and even skipping class. New York Times, in its series Poetry on Film, had a particular article interpreting How in the 21st century. The editors of the article noted How was banned after its publication in 1956 for obscene content. Though it prevailed in obscenity trials and has long been considered to be part of the canon, it may not be appropriate for all classes. Which sounds reasonable. But teachers make decisions every semester about their syllabus and the works that they'll include. Every time they select a work, it means that some work is excluded. And I think the tendency is towards job security, safety, and palatability. In summary, state and federal laws prohibit the dissemination of obscenity. State and federal laws protect speech that is deemed to have social, literary, or artistic importance. These laws may pertain to the teaching of beat literature in public schools. Some laws, as well as some individual school policies, have a chilling effect that might alter the composition, publication, and the teaching of beat literature. Thank you.
Please. Master. Statement. what is known in America as gay liberation?